Today's episode of the Vocal Minority Report is brought to you by LootCrate.com. Loot Crate is a monthly mystery crate service that delivers the best in geek plus gaming gear, from collectibles, apparel, tech gadgets, art, and other gear. It's kind of like Comic-Con in a box, right? And for listeners of the Vocal Minority Report, they've got a special offer where you can get 10% off any new subscription. You've got to go to trylootcrate.com/vocalminority and enter the code BRIDGE10 to save your 10% on any new subscription.
Previously on the Vocal Minority.
Are you part of the silent majority? Or are you part of the vocal minority?
Motherfuckers, go!
Attention, please!
If America can be saved, and I don't know if it's too late, but it'll be through a radio show. Like this new kind.
This shit here feels like the whole entire world collapsed.
The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers.
It's the vocal minority.
The revolution will be live.
Hey, what's good? It's your boy MC. Welcome to episode 52 of the Vocal Minority Report. We got a great show for you today. As always, thanks for downloading. You could have downloaded any podcast in the world, but you're still here with us. We appreciate that. I know it's been a while, but we're back on track. Friday is going to be the release date for guest interviews. Really appreciate you guys hanging around. We're back in business. Coming back with the news here soon as well. Make sure you go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe. Do that first. Leave a rating and review second. Tell everyone you know to do that. Apple Podcasts, best way. Every show, the biggest ones, the smallest ones. It helps people find the show and helps us move up in the rankings. So really appreciate everyone doing that. Go to Apple Podcasts, search for the Vocal Minority Report, leave a rating and review, subscribe to the show. You can find the show on everywhere you get your podcast, Stitcher, Google Play. You guys know the drill. Check out our website, thevocalminorityReport.com. Take our survey. You can donate to the show and so much more there. Our press kit. Anybody wants to sponsor the show, let me know. Email the show at vocalreport@gmail.com. Let's talk about today's episode. What we have is a documentarian on to talk about a film called The Skyjackers Tale. First, did you guys know that there were successful hijacking back in the 70s and 80s? Like, I had no idea. And the fact that a brother did one, I probably don't need to say much more than that. You should have your appetites wet and want to hear this interview. So check out the director and myself talking about this movie. The film opens in New York on Friday, June 30th at the Village East, with the national release to follow, including Los Angeles on July 14th at Laemmle's Monica Film Center. I think that's how you pronounce it. I haven't been in LA in a while. So New York today, June 30th, Friday at the Village East, and in Los Angeles on July 14th at Laemmle's Monica Film Center. But for now, enjoy us talking about it. There's so many twists and turns in this very complicated story. More than just a hijacking, if you can believe that. We'll talk to you after the episode. Make sure you go to our website, go to The Vocal Minority Report, take our news survey, visit our sponsors, enjoy the show. The Skyjackers Tale is a true crime documentary, and it's a film that I really enjoyed. It was also a film that was official selection of the Toronto International Film Festival. It's The Skyjackers Tale. Really happy to have on the director of that film. Let's welcome Jamie Kastner to the show. How's it going, Jamie?
Very good. Thanks so much for having me.
Before we get into the reason we're talking today about the film a little more, I wanted to ask you about one of your earlier films, if that's okay. I'll spend just a little bit of time on that, because I was looking through your filmography and I saw a film entitled Django Mania, and I got real excited. I've since read an 2005 article about that doc, and I now know the story. So I'm way more intrigued by the actual story in that film. But initially, when I saw that, I only thought of, of course, the Tarantino film or the old time film. So I was wondering, what take you had on it. But so when I read that article, though, it's one that I want to check out now, because it seems like it was kind of another very interesting, kind of deep character studies that evolved for you. I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but kind of like what I saw, in the Skyjackers Tale.
Yes, it was an interesting. Sorry, shifting gears here. There's a 12-year-old film, but I'll try to remember.
No, well, and you don't have to. Yeah.
I do remember. Django Mania was a film that so Skyjackers Tale in some ways is completely different from all the other work I've done, because it's a thriller built around pretty remarkable access, I think, to one of the most wanted American fugitives in Cuba, who got there by, it's such a nail biter of a story, got there by successfully hijacking a full American Airlines plane, and all this a dozen years after being convicted of, along with 4 other people, of murdering 8 people on a golf course owned by the Rockefellers in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So that story I've done a number of other documentaries, all of which I would consider political, but they're usually in a completely different vein. Some have been about art, some have been about cultural or identity things. I've done a film about the recession, and indeed I made this film, Django Mania, which was a look at what at the time was a newfound resurgence of interest in a sort of, at that point, 60-year dead gypsy jazz guitarist from Belgium named Django Reinhardt, who had, as it turned out, become the most popular jazz musician. He was an incredible, legendary guitar player, in spite of the fact that he had lost 2 of his fingers in a caravan fire in his caravan.
Oh wow!
And he rose to become the most popular jazz musician in Europe, even under the Nazis, while the Nazis are wiping out gypsies along with all the other undesirables. Django was being flown around performing for he was the toast of Nazi-occupied Paris, and beloved by the high command, who were kind of drinking in the other pleasures of the occupied city. So, and that film was also about what all this newfound enthusiasm of jazz buffs all around the world, from Hawaii to Tokyo, where I had people taping up their fingers to emulate Django's infirmity.
Okay.
What all that kind of adulation meant to gypsies today. In other words, along with this celebration of this long dead hero, did that mean that people liked actual living gypsies any more than they appeared to? And you can probably guess from my tone where the film landed on that point.
Right, exactly.
Also the kind of complex question of his own history. In other words, at least raising the uncomfortable question of how did he become so popular with the Nazis as a gypsy? So, yes, these kind of thorny, interesting cultural issues about the nature of heroes and unlikely heroes and anti-heroes, I think in a very roundabout way, you very astutely have identified, all do come into play even in as different a film as The Skyjackers Tale, where we have this fascinating but complex and by no means, he's certainly an anti-hero, and this amazing story of how he wound up gaining notoriety and being among that exclusive and dubious club of fugitives whose return President Trump is once again demanding.
Right. Yeah. See, and that's one of those things. It's just got so many. There's so much to it. The story. I was thinking that this has everything. It's got patriarchy, racism, murder, police misconduct, Black Panthers, a successful hijacking. It's like you got all my algorithms, and you made a film for me.
Well, don't mention it. I hadn't met yet at that point. This was for you.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. But it's one of those things where it's really such a compelling story, and you've told kind of what it's about there too, that it almost seems like it could have been a feature film because the story is so compelling. But I think the kind of depth and complexity that you captured maybe is more so suited for documentaries, which might be why obviously you're a documentarian. So I wonder how you would agree with that. And I guess if you've already told us about the film, just about that.
I could tell, I was just initially I was attracted by just the prospect of access to such a notorious figure.
I guess we should talk about him. I'm sorry to cut you off there because he's super notorious. And speaking of Ishmael Muslim Ali, who I had written anti-hero next to him. So I'm glad to hear you use that term. I guess you'll get into who he is and why he's so notorious, but he's certainly someone I had not heard of until having seen the film, though.
Yeah, no, it was. I came to it completely at random through my car mechanic of all things.
Okay.
Who said, "Oh, you make documentaries? I've got a buddy who goes down to Cuba and met this hijacker in a bar and might be interested in telling his story." And we Googled him right there in the mechanic's shop, and the kind of shards of his story came up in the very limited way in which it had been covered up to that point. The hijacking and this bizarre murder from 40 years ago of these people on a golf course. And, with the help of this mechanic's friend, I was sort of on my way across Cuba in short order, going to meet, I believe, this possible mass murderer, or I assumed he was.
Right.
What had been written about him at that time. And incidentally, he was known at the time as Ishmael LaBeet. He changed his name in prison when he converted. And although actually now that my timing may be wrong, he may have been a Muslim before that. But in any case, he changed his name for sure while he was in jail.
Okay.
In any case, so I go and meet this guy in this very cloak and dagger sequence of events, which again was quite different from my last films. The one I made directly before this was called The Secret Disco Revolution. So not to say that meeting Gloria Gaynor and the Village People didn't have its perils. This was something new.
Well, it looks like though he did take you to a discotheque though, and so you.
Yeah, now if I could only fit Hitler into this movie too, I would have a few continuous themes that were in every single movie I did, in spite of their differences.
Right.
Yes, he did eventually become relaxed enough. That was only on my second or third trip that was he comfortable with us filming with him out in the street there. Yes, we do get a taste of a bit of a taste of life in Cuba, which is such a fascinating place. I mean, one of the perks of the job is being able to experience another whole other life like that, not as a tourist really, but from the inside. So as soon as I met this guy and we talked, and he kind of vetted me and decided I was the one to tell this story, and he may have had he may have had more confidence in me than I had in myself in that regard initially. I immediately, I said, well, eventually kind of tiptoed up the question, why did you do the Fountain Valley murder? And he began to tell me a completely different story than anything I had read about it up to that point. And I realized there was a whole other side to this. From that, so yeah, of course, he had hijacked this plane successfully in 1984, a full American Airlines plane. He was sort of known as a gentleman hijacker. Nobody was harmed. They spent New Year's Eve in the Havana airport and bought cigars and went home. Hairy as it must have been for the passengers and crew. And,
right.
And prior to that, yes, I've been one of 5 people convicted in this murder called the Fountain Valley Massacre, in which 8 people were murdered on a golf course owned by the Rockefellers in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. And there was this, as I began to research it further to follow up on the story he told me, it turns out there was this unbelievable major trial that went on for a year that involved the most famous civil rights lawyers of the day,
right,
led by William Kunstler, who had previously just come off the Chicago 7, Chicago 8 trial, and Chauncey Eskridge, who had been a close collaborator of Martin Luther King, and who was a Chicago lawyer who represented Muhammad Ali in his conscientious objector case, and Margaret Ratner, Michael Ratner. It was like an all-star civil rights law team that represented him. Many of whom William Cutler unfortunately has died, but his widow Margaret was also a lawyer on that case. And Michael Ratner, a number of whom appear in the film and can speak firsthand to this, as do a number of lawyers from the other side who we also managed to get. And that was, so having heard his remarkable tale, which was a completely fresh twist on history, I felt kind of, it behooved me from a journalistic point of view to find the other players involved, to find other people who might have contrary accounts and give them a fair shake, as one does as a responsible journalist, or let's say who's not just doing a one-sided broadside about something. I felt that this would be a kind of thriller courtroom drama type structure that would work best if you heard best from heard the evidence from all sides and let the audience decide. And that's sort of how what guided me forward in the research and making of the film. And then you use the whatever tools are open to you. Yes, the documentary does allow for it's a wonderful form. I came to it kind of by accident. I had come from a combination of journalism and theater, and when I made my first film, I just realized what an open form it is creatively. You can do all sorts of stuff, and it does still have that room for serious thought. I mean, dramas. All these forms have their pluses and minuses, and in fact, I am also working on a fictional adaptation of this story because it is
great,
dramatic and interesting. But anyway, that gives you a sense of how I kind of
definitely
found out about it and got into it.
Definitely, because it's one of those things where talking about the anti-hero, specifically Ishmael Ali, because I just wonder, because I look at him, he appears to be living kind of like a pimp down in Cuba, for lack of a better term, and or as well as an advanced middle-aged alleged terrorist, murderer could be. He's kind of got that kind of, I don't know if you'll agree with this or not, but that kind of Tony Soprano, kind of Vic Mackey, Walter White appeal where, but he's a real person, obviously. So, but I believe that
sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that I think your storytelling kind of helped do that too, because as you mentioned, though, the story that perhaps you ended up with, and I'll kind of speak for you or summarize it, that may not be the story you necessarily set out to tell when you went on this fact-finding mission, after this amazing encounter. And so, but yeah, I'm just curious. So, for when you're documenting someone like him, especially this kind of being your first time with that kind of subject, did you see those kind of parallels? Those are fictional characters again, but that same kind of, maybe duplicity is a right word for him, since he, is a self-admitted criminal and whatever, but he's also a gentleman. I don't know what the right word is there. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that's all reasonable. I mean, listen, I feel that the first job of a film is to be entertaining. And I think insofar as there's a political message in it, either overtly or covertly, no one will pay attention if it's boring. So I do set out to make entertaining work first and foremost. And I knew that, with a documentary, you do a kind of casting as you do in any movie, except you're dealing with real people. And I think that unlike reality TV, where they have the luxury of manipulating and goofing and producing the hell out of people, if you want a documentary to feel real at all, you have to find better characters that are going to sustain with, unadorned. And I knew that when I met this guy, for all the kind of reasons you've outlined, he does feel like a fascinating fictional villain. I mean, or anti-hero, or one or the other.
Right.
And to me, that dubiousness about him made him more interesting for the kind of film that I'm interested in doing. I mean, while there is much great activist filmmaking going on of people exposing wrongs and revealing victims and victimizations and so on. It's not the kind of film I make, and I don't think it's my strength. I'm not drawn to that kind of material. I was drawn to him immediately because he's so complex and intriguing and not obvious. He's funny, he's extremely charismatic, he's sexy, he's scary, but you're intrigued. You're
right.
Definitely, you kind of want to find out, you're intrigued to find out more about what he's about. So I had a sense that he would be a star, a strong enough character to anchor a documentary.
Definitely, and then as he's able to elicit that sympathy, a little bit as well, at least for me, because you're able, again, in your storytelling, when you talk about the Virgin Islands and the oil boom, and then how the island kind of got to the condition it was in 72 or whatever. And then the story of the trial and I guess the alleged things that happened, but that aren't so alleged. But I don't want to give away, too much of the film. But
put the audience, ultimately, I tried to construct it to recreate a dramatic version of the kind of back and forth, that I experienced. You'd be told one version of things and you'd believe that. Meet one guy and find him extremely charming. Then you meet someone else and he's equally compelling. Or there's a whole other version of events. And then you look back at the history of it and you could start to understand what brought these people here and what might have been motivating them. And that was the kind of journey and process that I tried to bring the audience on as well. And also, I set out to do something that I think is not done a lot in documentaries, which is a trick, let's say, a narrative trick. I have an uncle who's a documentary maker as well, named John Kastner.
Right.
Jokingly called the grown-up documentary maker. He does very serious films about prison issues and aging and all the hardcore stuff that I avoided up until this film. He was thankfully doing, and winning several Emmys along the way. He's a lovely and very talented guy. I worked on a film with him when I was in my kind of apprenticeship, where he shifted the audience's perception of his protagonist 180 degrees over the course of the film. And you hardly ever see that done in documentaries, which, as noble as they may be, are often very straightforward as a form. And I actually set out to do something like that in my disco film from a narrative point of view, and it's definitely what I set out to do in Skyjackers Tale. I think from the advanced reaction I got, you feel one way about him at the beginning of the film and another way about him at the end. And that is through a combination of hearing all these other voices as well as his own, and all this sort of historical context of this story. All of which hopefully, goes to give you a more fleshed out picture of this group, which Donald Trump is only the very latest to try to vilify and capitalize on his vilification. These notorious bad American fugitives who are now can be blamed incorrectly for holding up the détente between the two countries. Now, instead of just seeing these people as cartoons on a wanted poster, you get to spend some time with one, get to know him as a person, and get to know the incredible story that forced him into a corner that has landed him there.
Exactly. And so, do you think about the film's possible impact on him, on his extradition?
Well, it's interesting. He was motivated to do the film, and this is my hope too, that it will raise awareness about the injustice of that in that case, in that trial, in that arrest, in that interrogation that landed them all in jail in the beginning, and hopefully do something to help his co-defendants who are rotting away 45 years on in terrible American prisons. And so that is certainly a hope he and I share. In terms of what the film might do for his position vis-a-vis extradition, he chose to share his story and in a way put himself in the spotlight, motivated by that desire to help the co-defendants, I think. But I think there is some risk involved. the film just got a very nice review in the Village Voice, in which the reporter says, "I hope Donald Trump doesn't find out about this guy." And
I read that actually. Yes, right. It's a good write up. But yes, exactly. Yeah.
From a craft publicity point of view, I'm torn. On one hand, I'd love for Donald Trump to find out about him. On the other hand, it's true. Look out, Ali, if he does.
Hey, well, if Donald Trump's got time to attack Morning Joe and Mika, then he certainly has time to. I don't know if you're aware that his morning tweets, but
it's that personal touch that he brings to things that I think makes him so beloved by so many.
Exactly. But you know, there's a couple things that you highlighted in this film that I don't know how intentional they were, but I assume they were very intentional. But you know, for instance, like the courts, being recruiting stations during Vietnam. That's something that I think I've seen dramatized before. And I guess if I think back long enough, I've certainly seen or read that. But it was interesting to kind of see you delve into that a little bit. Now, he mentioned that, and then obviously, you took it from there, through the storytelling. But I thought that was, very interesting. And then, just kind of plotting the course from there to perhaps embracing communism, but then domestically, it's in socialism with the Black Panther Party, and then kind of going back to the island. So I wonder how much of that history as a Canadian or just as a person, were you aware of that? And then maybe your kind of thoughts on that kind of the kind of court to the jungle kind of thing that happened there.
Well, I mean, I'm consider myself a reasonably, well-educated person with an interest in history and politics. I was certainly, had an awareness of the Panthers and different Black Power movements, and was interested have been interested in social struggles and protests of that era and other eras. But yes, I and listen, this story of poor people and criminals being used as cannon fodder is unfortunately nothing new.
Right.
Yet, nevertheless, it was an interesting. It is still, in so many ways, he touched on so much recent and not recent history, which is so resonant with our present time, that it was a fascinating aspect of getting to know him and being able to tell this story. To hear it from the horse's mouth, in that regard. Not only, the hijacking alone would have been fascinating, but then you learn the stories that led him there, and they intersect with so many interesting moments in history. Yes, a wild story of him being charged as a teenager with joyriding and being offered as go to jail or go to numb. Yeah, you've heard that, but shit, when you hear someone actually telling you that it happened to him,
right?
Still, it's pretty shocking. And to chart the path of his radicalization from that, I think is it's just one of this is an incredibly rich story, that fell into my lap.
Well, it's funny because maybe the most compelling thing is the whole hijacking, but that almost, it doesn't fall by the wayside, but it's like, what do you pick as the most interesting part of this? And I guess that's the beauty of it.
It was an interesting part of the, thank you. It was an interesting part of the process that indeed it seemed like such a bunch of dramatic goodies, if you will, as a storyteller. And as I was gathering the material, I didn't, this is part of what you figure out in the editing process, 6 months in editing. With a great editor, you have to decide what to give, what kind of weight to. And I went through exactly the same process that you just described, feeling. In other words, I thought that the hijacking was the most interesting thing, but in a way, it's thrilling and it's like action movie stuff. But it's just the beginning of a story that runs much deeper. And of course, the access, I think, the access to one of these notorious fugitives in Cuba and seeing how he lived and seeing him as a person and all of this stuff. I mean, I got lucky with the material. It's very, very rich and now extremely timely.
Timely from Cuba relations to Trump to criminal justice. Yeah, right. Black Lives Matter. Yes, I mean, police misconduct. I mean, the criminal. I mean, the courtroom scenes. I mean, it's so history repeating itself. 45, almost 50 years later, and said to have those people still be available to speak on it, and said to have the true subject there. Is he a fugitive? I don't know. Is he technically?
Well, he's a fugitive.
Okay.
If you Google his name, the first thing that comes up is his FBI most wanted poster.
Okay. Well, then, so to have this, access to this fugitive.
He's one of the top 5 most wanted American fugitives in Cuba out of an estimated list of about 70 to 80 people who were granted asylum there, political asylum there. I mean, lots of nutters hijacked planes there over the decades. I mean, lots during the heyday of what's called the golden age of skyjacking. It's a very good book by Brendan Kerner written about this called The Skies Belong to Us. And during the statistic was in the 70s, over a 4-year period in the heyday, 1 plane a week over 4 years was hijacked, and the vast majority of them went to Cuba. It was almost like if a bus was slow, that's what you do. So they would hijack these planes, but it was everyone from Black Panthers to just completely insane people, and the Cubans did not by any means, much as they enjoyed thumbing their nose at the Americans and hanging on to their aircraft for a while and so on. They did not grant the vast majority of these people asylum. This is part of what was remarkable about this story. This guy was recognized in part. Asada Shakur, who is fugitive number 1, who Ali knows and who vouched for his being granted asylum there was part of that. But yeah, he's definitely a fugitive.
Okay, right. Yeah. Okay. Well, and as I asked that, I felt foolish, but I'm glad I did because your explanation though was perfect. So
I've been living with him for 4 years or whatever. I don't expect anyone else to.
It's certainly such a fascinating story. We mentioned being out in Cuba. So what is Cuba like? I mean, obviously when my impression is, old cars from the 50s and stuff like that. And I saw that and it looked like they got really nice paint jobs on those old cars, but,
I mean, it is a fascinating place. It is, and I actually haven't been to Havana. He's not in Havana. And of course I can't tell you where he is or I'd have to kill you. That seems unnecessary.
Right. Yeah. No, I like the film, but not that much.
We're getting along so well.
Exactly.
Yeah, but he's in a small city, and it was fascinating to be able to. It's like stepping back in time. I mean, yes, there are the old cars, but there's also, they're riding around on these things called coches. The horse and carriage taxis. And that's as commonplace in town, and the countryside looks like you're 100 years back, and all the revolutionary posters lining the roads, and yes, you do have this sort of ongoing spectacle of not only the old American cars but also the old Russian cars. The American cars look good. There's an old gutted Lada does not make for a comfortable sightseeing tour on one extremely bumpy highway across the country, let me tell you.
Okay, all right.
There is, it's fascinating as a whole other political social system. It doesn't feel nearly as dangerous or desperate than other places in the Caribbean that I've been to.
Okay.
Just as in terms of that kind of perspective. Whatever the things, it's far from perfect, and there's a lot of people who are not rich there, but they're not like blasted out on drugs and killing each other either. And there's healthcare and there's education. Okay, the neurosurgeons can't make as much money there, so some of them try to emigrate to the States. It's a fascinating place. It is a fascinating place, and you're not saying without its flaws any more than any other society. But it was really an interesting glimpse of and and he's not living high off the hog there, but by any means, I don't know if anybody is.
Right.
He doesn't have running water. They gather the water in a kind of through a tap or a cistern that gets shared between the apartments and the place, but that said, he's happy. He has a good life. He's not starving on the street, and he's not rotting away in some private maximum security American prison and being treated like cattle, like his co-defendants are for 45 years. So he's happy with his lot in life, and I can see why.
Right, yeah, especially considering that, and he mentions a few times in the film, about his brother's co-defendant still being down. So yeah, I'm sure that, and because and I don't want to give too much away, but you've got these because they all confessed, right? So we got this trial, but there were confessions that led to this kind of ultimate. I mean, you get into all that in the film there, but essentially
they were convicted based on confessions that were obtained in a very dubious manner.
Correct. Right. Right.
That much.
Right. Okay. Yes.
And we get into that, and I was very pleasantly surprised to be able to get certain law enforcement people to speak about this on the record in a way they never have before, and
yeah, that
is ought to be new evidence that should force a re-examination of that case, in my opinion.
I hadn't thought about that last thing you just said, that new evidence that should. But yeah, exactly. I mean, were you the one asking the question? Forgive my ignorance.
Were you? I conducted the interview.
Okay. So I said ask the question. So you were the one interviewing. So
okay.
So
no, it's not always the way in a documentary. Yes, I did the interview.
In that moment, obviously, I'm thinking like, oh shit, what did he just say? And then how you maintain your composure and clarify. And what are you feeling in that moment?
Well, I guess what we're talking about is a moment where a cop makes a fairly shocking revelation about what went on, or admission of what went on 40 years ago, and that the officer in question was actually in Puerto Rico and way up in the hills, and my cameraman and I kind of as soon as we found him and found he was willing to talk, the researcher found him. We got on the plane the next day and went down there, and he met us. It was like torrential rain, and we drove halfway across the island. He met us like in a Kmart parking lot, and we followed him up into the hills where he lived. And then there we were, having this conversation, and it was sort of the light was fading, kind of poetically enough or appropriately in one of those happy accidents of art direction that sometimes happen in a documentary, where the atmosphere is mirroring the content. As in interview terms, I kind of am circling this guy to try to get him to admit on camera to what went down 40 years ago.
Right.
And at first he's resisting, and it's like a kind of a bout. And this guy is a big, tough, I mean, I don't care if he's 70, he's his tougher, his little finger is tougher than I'll ever be.
He looks tough too. I mean, he looks like an imposing, he looks the part. He looks the part.
Again, from a kind of quote unquote casting point of view, what a bunch of stars.
Right.
They were all kind of like mentally casting the movie at every turn.
Speaking of casting too, like the prosecutor, for instance, he's perfect. I mean, everyone naturally is just perfect for their perceived roles.
Great characters. Well, thank you.
Yes.
I agree. And so he, I was definitely nervous. I mean, there it's just me and my Canadian cameraman, which is about as non-threatening as it sounds, way up in the wilds of Puerto Rico. And what if this, here's a guy who's done God knows what in the course of his career, and he's having a very kind of emotional. You see him struggling with himself in that scene. You see him struggling. Is he going to say it? Is he going to come clean about it? And he's kind of at war with himself. I guess it represents a betrayal of the person he used to be, a betrayal of his former, brothers on the force, and because it's incriminating them too. But it's a big deal what he did. But in the moment, it was actually quite scary, and yet some professional something, in spite of my whatever natural Canadianness, let's call it.
Well, you said it, not me.
Not to get in a conflict. There I am. I haven't come all this way to I'm going to bloody well do what I can to get the answer out of him. And I pushed him and pushed him and pushed him and pushed him, and finally he gave it to me. And I lived to tell the tale, which was a nice bonus.
Right, and capture it on film. So it's kudos to you and your cameraman, your Canadian cameraman.
Thank you. Yeah, it was pretty wild.
And would you agree that it kind of got good to him when he started telling you, like, there was reluctancy, and then I mean, you were there. To me, it kind of got good to him at the end, like when he was admitting it. And I don't mean to chuckle at it, but it's just a matter of, I don't know if you perceive that or not, in your subsequent viewing of it, or even sitting there, like he kind of embraced it a bit.
You mean? Yeah. He wanted to admit to it. He wanted to get it off his chest. He's a guy who I mean, my personal opinion, yeah, he's a guy. Well, he said himself, in our conversation in general, it's edited, not inaccurately, obviously. It's especially with that, you're absolutely circumspect about presenting it accurately. But I'm just saying, in our larger discussion, he explained how he's changed a lot in that time, and how he's had kind of, a come to Jesus moment, kind of figuratively and literally, and also considers himself a socialist now, which his former self, a thug cop, for lack of a better word, would have been appalled at the things he said he found himself saying now. So, he's an interesting guy, absolutely an interesting, thoughtful person who was, in as we feel in the film, kind of in a live struggle with his former self. And yes, there is an element of relief when he finally gets it off his chest. I'm being given the time signal.
Beautiful. We can wrap it there. So yeah. Last thing I have for you, I guess, just to identify yourself and say that you're a part of the vocal minority.
Okay. This is Jamie Kastner, the director of The Skyjackers Tale, a new documentary thriller, and I'm part of the vocal minority.
Beautiful. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. The film, it opens in New York tomorrow, Friday, June 30th at the Village East, and then in Los Angeles, July 14th. And we'll put that information out. But no, that's all I got for you. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you so much.
All right, have a good day.
Thank you for doing this.
All right, thank you. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care. Okay, bye-bye.
Hey, welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I really enjoyed that conversation with Jamie. Very candid, very interesting story, and the way his mind works. I think I kind of put that together. But when you see The Skyjackers Tale, you'll get what we're talking about. And don't worry, we didn't give it away. No spoilers. Everything we discussed on this is much more fleshed out within that documentary. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's true crime. It's a thriller. It's police misconduct. Like I said, so many things that I think that you guys will really enjoy. So make sure you check that out. If you're in New York, it's happening today at the Village East. It's in Los Angeles on the 14th of July at Laemmle's Monica Film Center. Make sure you visit our sponsors. Sign up at www.trylootcrate.com/vocal minority. Enter the code BRIDGE10 for your 10% savings. For less than $20 a month, you get 6 to 8 items that include licensed gear, apparel, collectibles, and unique one-of-a-kind items. www.trylootcrate.com/vocal minority. Enter the code BRIDGE10 for your 10% savings. Go to Apple Podcasts, search for the Vocal Minority Report, leave a rating and review, subscribe to the show. Well, at your next episode, next week. All power to the people. Peace.
This has been a Vocal Neighbors production.